I walked into the reunion alone. The room went quiet for a second. Then I heard the whispers. My cousin Harper smirked and said, "Did your date get lost?" A few others laughed. Uncle Rick shook his head and added, "She doesn't need a date. She needs a miracle." Everyone chuckled louder. My face burned, and I could feel the stares, like they were all waiting for me to break. They thought it was funny. They thought I was the same quiet girl they could push around. But in just a few minutes, their smiles would disappear, and every single phone in that room would be recording something they would never forget. My name is Elena Carter. I'm 28 years old, and if you asked my family, they would probably tell you I'm the quiet one, the girl who never dated much, who never spoke up, the one who slipped into the background at every family event. Driving to the reunion that night, my stomach was tied in knots. I almost turned the car around twice. My mom, Marisol, had convinced me to go. She had looked me in the eyes earlier that week and said, "Family is family, Elena. Even if they don't see your worth yet, you show up with your head high." It sounded simple when she said it, but as I pulled into the crowded driveway and heard the laughter spilling out of the house, I felt small again, just like I had when I was younger. My cousins had been teasing me since high school. They dated popular kids. They showed off their grades, their jobs, their weddings. I was always the one they left out. When I walked inside, the reunion looked picture perfect. Balloons, long tables full of food, music playing, kids running around. People were chatting in groups, but no one waved me over. No one asked how I'd been. I stood there with my hands clutching my bag, forcing myself to breathe. I tried to find comfort in small details. Grandma June was by the fireplace, knitting even in the middle of the chaos. She caught my eye and gave me a warm smile, like she always did. That smile was the only thing in the room that felt safe. But then I caught Harper's eyes from across the table, already narrowed, already looking for a reason to make me feel smaller. And I knew the night was about to test me in ways I hadn't expected. The moment I stepped further into the dining hall, it felt like every pair of eyes turned toward me. I had expected some awkwardness, but not the wave of laughter that spread after Harper's comment. "Did your date get lost?" she said loudly enough for the entire room to hear, her lips curling into that same smug grin she had worn ever since we were teenagers. A few cousins chuckled, and I caught the way they leaned into each other, whispering like children sharing secrets. Even though we were all adults now, I forced myself to keep walking, but my chest tightened. Then Uncle Rick, never one to hold back, spoke up with his booming voice. "She doesn't need a date. She needs a miracle." His words hit harder than Harper's because they carried the weight of an older man who thought he had the right to define my worth. The laughter that followed stung even worse. It wasn't just a private joke between cousins anymore. It was the entire room laughing at me. I felt my face grow hot. My hands clenched around the strap of my bag, and for a moment, I thought about running back out the door. That was what they expected, wasn't it? For me to shrink, to disappear, to let them win the way I always had. But then I caught sight of my mother across the room. She wasn't smiling, and she wasn't laughing. She just stood there, watching me carefully, her chin lifted high as if silently reminding me to stand taller. I swallowed hard and straightened my shoulders. If I left, they would remember my back disappearing through the door. If I stayed, at least I had the chance to rewrite the ending. Still, every step deeper into the room felt heavier, as if the air itself was pressing down on me. I could hear the phones clicking on. Some of my cousins were recording already, probably expecting a meltdown they could share later. That knowledge burned in my chest, but it also sparked something stronger. If they wanted a show, I would give them one, but not the one they expected. I moved toward the long tables where most of the family sat. The chairs were filled with people laughing, plates clinking, children shouting. But as I passed, conversations quieted. It was as if my presence reminded them of something they'd rather not acknowledge, that not everyone in the family fit their perfect picture. I noticed Harper nudging another cousin, both of them smirking as they pulled out their phones. "Get this," she whispered, not realizing I could hear. My throat tightened, but I didn't slow down. When I finally reached the front of the hall, I spotted the head table. It was decorated with fresh flowers and reserved signs, the kind of place usually meant for the most respected guests or the elders. My eyes landed on one empty chair at the center. For a moment, I froze. Sitting there would be bold, almost defiant, and every voice in my head warned me against it. But another voice, quieter and steadier, reminded me that I belonged wherever I chose to stand. So I pulled out the chair and sat down. The reaction was instant. Murmurs rippled across the room, and people turned to one another with raised eyebrows. Harper's voice cut through the noise. "Look at her, acting like she belongs at the big table." The way she sneered made it clear she thought I had just embarrassed myself further. I didn't reply. I didn't even look at her. Instead, I rested my hands calmly in my lap and kept my gaze steady, letting the silence speak for me. That silence made some people uncomfortable, and I saw it in the way they shifted in their seats. They were waiting for me to crack, to defend myself, to play into their little game. Inside, though, I was fighting a storm. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. My stomach felt tight, and I could sense the heat of dozens of eyes locked on me. But I didn't move. I thought of my mom's voice telling me to keep my head high. I thought of all the years I had let them reduce me to the quiet one. This time, I would not give them the satisfaction. The room felt stretched with tension, like a rubber band pulled too tight, ready to snap. That was when the doors at the far end opened, and everything shifted. A tall man in a tailored suit walked in, his presence commanding attention without him saying a word. Conversations halted, laughter died mid-breath, and every head turned toward him. I recognized him instantly. Adrian Blake, the CEO. I had been working with for months. He wasn't supposed to arrive yet, but here he was, right on time for the moment that would change everything. I stayed in my chair, watching as he scanned the room. Then his eyes landed on me, and a smile spread across his face. He walked straight toward the head table, past my stunned relatives, and said words that froze the entire room. "Finally, we've been waiting for you, boss." The moment Adrian Blake's words echoed through the hall, the air shifted. "We've been waiting for you, boss." That single sentence seemed to hang in the room, too heavy for anyone to brush off. The same people who had been laughing only minutes before now stared in shock. Phones were still raised, but no one was snickering anymore. Their expressions changed from amusement to confusion, and then to disbelief. I could feel every pair of eyes on me as Adrian reached the table and placed his hand lightly on the back of my chair, a gesture that signaled respect rather than pity. He smiled at me with the same warmth he showed in the office, the kind of smile that said, "You belong here." I looked around the table and saw my cousins frozen, their mouths slightly open, as if their brains were trying to catch up with what they had just witnessed. Harper lowered her phone slowly, her smirk replaced by something that looked almost like panic. For years, I had been silent in moments like this. I had let the comments pass, had chosen retreat instead of confrontation. But in that moment, I realized I had a choice. I could stay quiet and let Adrian's presence do all the talking, or I could finally claim the respect that had been denied to me for so long. My hands trembled under the table, but I forced them to stay still. I knew this was my chance to step into the role I had worked for, the role no one in my family believed I could ever hold. I looked up at Adrian, then back at the room. "Thank you," I said calmly, letting my voice carry just enough to be heard by everyone. I stood slowly, smoothing down my dress, making sure I didn't rush. Every second of silence made the tension thicker, but I embraced it. For the first time, the silence was mine to control. The cousins who had mocked me a few minutes earlier now avoided my gaze. Uncle Rick cleared his throat and tried to speak, But his voice cracked, and he fell quiet again. I could almost hear their thoughts racing. Elena? The boss? How? When? None of them had even asked what I was doing with my life. They had all assumed I was drifting, failing, waiting for someone else to define my path. But I had been building something they never saw, something bigger than their small expectations. Adrian pulled out a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table in front of me. Another deliberate move that turned all eyes toward me. "Shall we?" he asked with a tone of respect. He wasn't putting on a show. This was simply how he treated me in every meeting, every negotiation, every decision we made together. And now my family was seeing it too. I nodded, but instead of opening the folder, I faced my family. "I know some of you think I don't belong here," I said, my voice steady. "And I've heard the jokes for years. Too quiet, too single, too simple. But what you don't know is that while you were busy laughing, I was busy working. I've spent the last 5 years building something I'm proud of, something that doesn't need anyone's approval. Tonight, you're going to see that I don't need a date to prove my worth. I earned my place here." Gasps and whispers rippled across the hall. Some cousins exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to say. Harper finally blurted out, "Wait, are you saying you're his assistant or something?" Her voice was sharp, but it carried an edge of desperation. Adrian turned toward her with a polite but firm look. "Number Elena is not my assistant. She's the majority owner of Blake Enterprises and the new chairwoman of the board. I work for her." The weight of those words crashed into the room like a wave. My heart raced, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from the rush of knowing I had finally taken control of the story that had always been written for me. For the first time, they weren't laughing. They were listening. I let the silence linger again, standing taller now. "You wanted a show," I said, looking at Harper directly. "Here it is." In that moment, I realized something important. It wasn't just about shutting down their laughter. It was about deciding that I would no longer live in the shadows of their expectations. I had chosen to step into the light, and once I did, there was no going back. The tension that filled the room wasn't just theirs anymore. It was mine, and I was holding it with both hands. When Adrian's words sank into the room, "She's the majority owner of Blake Enterprises and the new chairwoman of the board," the silence that followed was almost painful. It wasn't the light, playful silence of a paused conversation. It was heavy, like the entire family had been knocked backward at once. For a moment, all I could hear was the faint clinking of silverware against plates as someone nervously shifted. My cousins, who had been smirking and recording only minutes ago, now looked as if the floor had been pulled out from under them. Harper's face was priceless. Her mouth opened, then closed, as if words had failed her for the first time in her life. She glanced at the others, searching for backup, but no one moved. Even Uncle Rick, who usually had a snide remark ready, looked pale. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed tight, as though he was trying to make sense of what he'd just heard. Adrian continued without hesitation, his voice firm. "Elena is not only my boss, she's one of the youngest women in this state to ever take a position of this level. You should be proud to have her sitting at your table." His words carried the authority of a man people were used to listening to, and now he was pointing all that respect toward me. I felt something shift inside me then. For years, I had kept my achievements close, almost hidden. I had been afraid of being dismissed, of my family turning even success into another reason to mock me. But now the truth was out in the open, and instead of feeling exposed, I felt free. I looked around the table, my eyes settling on Harper first. She tried to recover her usual sharpness and said, "So what? You're his boss on paper. You don't actually run things, right?" Her voice cracked halfway through, betraying her doubt. I didn't flinch. "I run every major decision. I lead the board meetings. I own the majority of the company's shares. This isn't just a title. It's responsibility, and it's mine." The murmur of whispers rose again, but this time they weren't mocking. They were uncertain, even respectful. My mother's eyes glistened with tears, pride shining through. Grandma June put down her knitting, folded her hands, and gave me the kind of nod that said, "Finally, they see you." Then Uncle Rick finally spoke, his voice lower, less confident than usual. "You're telling me you kept this from us? You're really running a company?" I held his gaze. "Yes, I kept it from you because you never asked. You only ever assumed I was failing. And maybe I let you believe that because it was easier than fighting, but not anymore." The room fell silent again. Every second felt electric, as if the balance of power in our family had just been rewritten. Some cousins shifted uncomfortably. Others stared at their phones, but no one dared laugh. Harper tried one last time, her voice rising in desperation. "So what if you have money and a fancy title? That doesn't change who you really are." I stood taller, my voice steady and calm. "You're right. It doesn't change who I am. I'm still Elena, but now who I am is enough. And I don't need your approval or a date at my side to prove my worth." The words came out stronger than I expected, and for the first time, I didn't feel small saying them. I felt powerful, not because of the money or the company, but because I had finally claimed my voice in front of the very people who had tried to silence it for years. Adrian leaned closer and added with a smile, "If you doubt her, check the news tomorrow morning. Her name will be on every business headline." The confidence in his tone made the cousins exchange uneasy glances. They knew there was no exaggeration in his words. As I looked around, the phones were still recording, but the tone had changed completely. No one was mocking anymore. They were capturing a moment they would have to live with forever. The night their laughter turned into shock. The night their quiet cousin took command of the room without raising her voice. I saw my mother's face, glowing with pride, and felt the weight of years of doubt sliding off my shoulders. Grandma June's soft smile was all the confirmation I needed that I had done the right thing. I raised my chin and said clearly, "You asked where my date was. I didn't bring one because I don't need one. I walked in here with everything I've built on my own, and that's more than enough." The room was still, but it wasn't hostile anymore. It was filled with something new, respect. Even if some of them didn't want to admit it, they couldn't deny what they had seen and heard. Their smirks were gone, their jokes silenced. For the first time in my life at a family gathering, I didn't feel like the outsider. I felt like the one they couldn't ignore. And as I sat back down, with Adrian beside me and my family stunned into silence, I realized this wasn't just the climax of the night. It was the turning point of my entire story. The weight of the reveal lingered in the air long after Adrian's words faded. My cousins still sat frozen, some gripping their phones as if they weren't sure whether to keep recording or delete the proof of what had just happened. For years, they had laughed at me, dismissed me, labeled me as the girl who didn't measure up. And now they were watching me claim a place none of them had ever imagined for me. I glanced toward my mother, and the look on her face was one I'll never forget. Her eyes shimmered with tears, but there was pride in every line of her expression. She nodded at me, her lips forming a small smile that said, "This is who you've always been." That look steadied me, reminded me that my success wasn't just about silencing doubters. It was about honoring the sacrifices and encouragement of the woman who had believed in me when no one else did. Grandma June shifted in her chair, placing her knitting needles on the table. She spoke softly, but clearly enough for everyone to hear. "I always knew you had something special in you, Elena. You carry yourself with grace. Tonight, you showed them that real strength doesn't need noise. It just needs truth." Her voice broke the tension, and for the first time that evening, I felt the knot in my chest loosen. Not everyone took it gracefully. Harper leaned back, folding her arms, her face flushed with embarrassment. "We were just joking," she muttered, her eyes darting around the room. "You know we love you, Elena. We didn't mean anything by it." The words were hollow, forced, and I could tell she was scrambling to save face. I met her eyes and spoke calmly. "Love doesn't humiliate. Respect does. Jokes that come at someone's expense aren't love. Tonight wasn't the first time, Harper, but it's the last time I'm letting it pass. My voice didn't rise, but it carried the weight of everything I had endured in silence. Some cousins nodded quietly, avoiding my gaze, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Uncle Rick cleared his throat and said, "Well, I guess we didn't give you enough credit." His tone was stiff, almost reluctant, but it was the closest thing to an apology I would ever get from him. I didn't need their apologies. What I needed, and what I finally had, was the power to define myself. For years, I had measured my worth through their opinions, letting their laughter shape the way I saw myself. But now I understood something that would stay with me forever. Validation from others is fragile, and it can vanish the moment they choose to laugh again. True worth is built from within, and once you recognize it, no one can take it away. Adrian leaned closer and whispered, "You handled that perfectly." His words were simple, but they carried reassurance. He hadn't needed to defend me, because I had defended myself. The reunion continued in a strange quiet after that. Conversations resumed slowly, but the energy had shifted completely. Instead of smirks, I noticed glances filled with curiosity, even admiration. A few younger cousins approached me shyly, asking questions about what I did, their voices filled with genuine wonder. For the first time, I wasn't the family's punchline. I was someone they wanted to learn from. When the evening drew to a close, I walked outside with my mother. The night air was cool against my skin, and for the first time in years, I felt lighter. My mom squeezed my hand. "I hope you see now what I've always seen in you," she said softly. "You didn't need this moment to prove anything to me, Elena, but I'm glad they finally saw what I've known all along." Her words brought tears to my eyes, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from release. I hugged her tightly, realizing that this night wasn't just about shocking my family. It was about finally breaking free from the small box they had trapped me in, a box I had unknowingly carried with me even outside family gatherings. Driving home later, I replayed the night in my mind, the humiliation, the laughter, the reveal, and the silence that followed. It all blurred together into something larger than the moment itself. It was the lesson I had been chasing without knowing it. Success means little if you're constantly waiting for others to acknowledge it. Confidence means everything when you finally decide you don't need their permission to stand tall. That night, I didn't just change how my family saw me. I changed how I saw myself. For the first time, I walked into a room and didn't shrink when they laughed. I walked out knowing I didn't need their approval. I had built something bigger than their jokes, stronger than their doubt. And if anyone asks me now what I took away from that reunion, I'd tell them this: the greatest power comes from realizing you are enough, not because others finally admit it, but because you finally believe it yourself.